Real Madrid, 2003 to 2007. The Galactico meltdown. You win La Liga, pop the champagne, celebrate with your team and staff, and your reward, you get fired the next day. That's exactly what happened to Vicente del Bosque, sacked literally 24 hours after delivering Madrid's 29th league title, because Florentino Perez thought his grandfatherly appearance didn't match his vision of football. But that was just the appetizer. The main course of chaos came when they refused Claude Makelele a pay raise and sold him to Chelsea because Perez believed defensive players weren't marketable enough. As a replacement, Florentino brought in David Beckham, that summer's golden boy signing. When Zidane heard about this swap, he delivered the most prophetic quote in football history. Why put another layer of gold paint on the Bentley when you are losing the entire engine? By engine, Zidane meant the man teammates called the best player in the team for years, but people just don't notice him. Perez had publicly mocked Makelele, claiming he rarely passed it for longer than 3 meters and wouldn't be missed. Spoiler alert, when you remove the engine, the car doesn't just stop, it explodes. While Real Madrid entered footballing purgatory, Makelele became the foundation of Chelsea's golden era. In 5 years at Stamford Bridge, he helped Chelsea win their first league title since 1955, then added another, plus 4 more trophies. Chelsea literally doubled their major honours with Real's unwanted French motor. Meanwhile, the Bentley was falling apart. Desperate to replace their engine, they signed Thomas Gravesen from Everton for £2.5 million 18 months later. The Danish midfielder was so shocked, he initially thought they meant Atletico Madrid. Gravesen later said, "The team fell apart at times because only a few were doing any running. At times, they behaved like brats." The dressing room became a telenovela with a Netflix budget. Beckham arrived to play the same position as Figo, creating football's most expensive rotation system. Meanwhile, rumours swirled that Perez chose Beckham over Ronaldinho because marrying a Spice Girl trumps rainbows and nutmegs in boardroom mathematics. That decision aged terribly when Ronaldinho later received a standing ovation at the Bernabeu after destroying Madrid 3-0. Carlos Queiroz found himself managing football's Disney World. He was reportedly forced to select players based on star factor and following rather than football ability. 3 consecutive years of failure, from 2004 to 2007. Copa del Rey final lost to Zaragoza. Annual Champions League eliminations, Monaco, Arsenal, heartbreak on repeat. 4th in La Liga like mid-table nobodies. For 3 years, the most successful club in history became a laughingstock. They'd gone from European royalty to expensive reality TV, where everyone was famous but nobody knew why. When they finally won La Liga in 2007, their first major trophy in 4 years, Perez sacked the manager who delivered it, because winning wasn't glamorous enough. Zidane's prophecy came true with devastating precision. Remove the engine, add gold paint, and watch the most beautiful car become expensive scrap metal. Barcelona, 2007 to 2008. Nightclub FC. Frank Rijkaard's Barcelona had once been the beautiful game personified, tiki-taka poetry that made grown men weep. But by 2007-08, they transformed from football artists into something that resembled a nightclub with a football problem attached. The rot started at the top. Ronaldinho and Deco were regularly turning up to training sessions drunk, according to former Arsenal midfielder Alexander Hleb. Ronaldinho and Deco came to training drunk. That's why they were sold in 2008, because the club were afraid that they would affect Lionel Messi. But it gets worse. Detailed reports emerged of Ronaldinho's wild nights, including a journalist following him to nightclubs where he'd party until 5 a.m., taking his shirt off, surrounded by beautiful women, dancing like there was no tomorrow, all while supposedly recovering from injury. A Barcelona board member revealed that Ronaldinho plays the bongos until 2 in the morning every night. Everybody sees that. Everybody has a phone and takes pictures of him. The Brazilian's decline was staggering. Having been a model professional during his first 3 successful seasons, Ronaldinho's partying lifestyle saw his physical condition decline dramatically, with many at the club believing he was already past his prime. The arrival of Thierry Henry should have been the perfect solution, But instead it created an awkward love triangle, where Eto'o felt displaced and Ronaldinho felt entitled to his spot, even when showing up to training resembling someone who'd lost a fight with a cocktail menu. Rijkaard, who had once tamed egos and created Champions League magic, lost complete control of the dressing room. As one report described it, Ronaldinho allowed himself to be consumed by long nights of partying, with the corresponding hangovers that were slept off on a massage bed in the gym changing room. The man who had turned Barcelona into European champions couldn't even get his stars to show up sober. The season became a disaster movie in slow motion. They finished third in La Liga, lost both Clásicos to Real Madrid, including a humiliating 4-1 defeat at the Bernabeu. On May 8, 2008, the day after that devastating defeat, Joan Laporta announced Rijkaard would be replaced by a relatively unknown coach called Pep Guardiola. Guardiola immediately told reporters that Deco, Ronaldinho and Samuel Eto'o were not in his plans, declaring the party officially over. Sometimes you need to hit rock bottom to remember that football is actually played on a pitch, not in a VIP section with a hangover and a bongo drum.
Inter Milan 2011 to 2012. The Mourinho hangover. 1 year after Jose Mourinho led Inter to the treble and then promptly abandoned them for Real Madrid like a dad going out for cigarettes, Inter discovered that replacing a tactical genius is slightly more complicated than ordering a new coffee machine. They hired Gian Piero Gasperini, who immediately tried to force a 3-5-2 formation on players who had just conquered Europe playing 4-2-3-1. It was like asking Michelin-starred chefs to suddenly make toast with a broken toaster. The system required wingbacks they didn't have and relegated Wesley Sneijder, the man who nearly won the Ballon d'Or, to a deeper role where he looked about as comfortable as a fish trying to drive a Ferrari. Gasperini's reign lasted exactly 5 matches, shorter than most reality TV contestants. He got the boot after defeats to Palermo and Novara, teams that Inter used to beat while sleepwalking. Rumour has it his training sessions were so confusing that players started bringing translators just to understand their positions. Claudio Ranieri replaced him, but even the man who would later perform Leicester miracles couldn't fix the fundamental problem. This squad was tired, mentally broken, and suffering from post-Mourinho depression syndrome. Sneijder and Eto'o, the stars who had tormented Barcelona and Bayern 12 months earlier, suddenly found themselves on the transfer list. Diego Forlan was signed to replace Eto'o, but couldn't even get registered for Champions League matches initially. Imagine buying a Ferrari and being told you can't drive it on highways. Meanwhile, club legends Zanetti and Cambiasso watched helplessly as their empire crumbled faster than a house of cards. The dressing room atmosphere became so toxic that players reportedly started requesting transfers via WhatsApp. The season became musical chairs, with more coaches than a relegation battle, with Ranieri eventually replaced by 36-year-old Andrea Stramaccioni, younger than some players he was managing. They finished 6th. 6th! For defending treble winners, this was like Manchester City finishing in League Two or Messi forgetting how to kick a ball. Sometimes, when you lose a special one, you realise just how bloody special they actually were. Manchester United 2013 to 2022. The Woodward experiment. Sir Alex Ferguson retired and left behind the greatest dynasty in English football. Ed Woodward looked at this masterpiece and decided what it really needed was more social media followers and tractor sponsorship deals. Replacing Ferguson was always going to be a difficult task, but it proved to be more like changing a plane's engine while flying. The Woodward era featured a parade of managers: Moyes, Van Gaal, Mourinho, Solskjaer and Ralph Rangnick, each arriving with hope and leaving with thousand-yard stares. Meanwhile, Woodward obsessed over PR signings that became legendary disasters. Di Maria, who was robbed at his home and hated Manchester so much he left after 1 season. Alexis Sanchez, who became the world's highest-paid piano player on £500,000 per week, and the never-ending Pogba saga that cost £89 million to re-sign their own youth product. The most damning revelation? Sources told ESPN that Woodward read 8 books on Mourinho before hiring him, with an insider admitting, Ed knew what United were getting. He knew it would become toxic and end badly. But the gamble was that he would win the title before it all went sour. The gamble failed spectacularly. Ferguson's timing couldn't have been worse. He retired just as his aging squad needed rebuilding and the social media generation was arriving. Without his protective shield, the club became a media circus where every training ground spat became front-page news. Rumours swirled of players dancing in the dressing room after defeats, with Pogba at the centre of most controversies. Van Gaal had his own feuds with Victor Valdez, while Louis van Gaal later delivered the knockout blow. Ed Woodward was installed as CEO, somebody with zero understanding of football who was previously an investment banker. United became football's most expensive soap opera, always creating headlines but never for the right reasons. They spent over £1 billion but won just 3 trophies in 9 years, becoming the sport's most expensive meme factory. Players like Memphis Depay, Bastian Schweinsteiger and Marouane Fellaini came and went like ghosts haunting Old Trafford. Woodward resigned in 2022 after the Super League fiasco. Manchester United fans live in hope, but they've learned a harsh truth. When accountants try to replace football legends, the numbers never add up. At least, not on the pitch.
Bayer Leverkusen, 2001 to 2002. Neverkusen. Bayer Leverkusen created a masterpiece in the art of almost. They assembled a squad featuring Michael Ballack, Lucio, and Dimitar Berbatov, who played football so beautiful it hurt to watch them lose. With 3 games left in the 2001-2002 season, they were 5 points clear at the top of the Bundesliga and had booked 2 cup finals. One against Schalke in Berlin, the other against Real Madrid at Hampden Park for European glory. They had one hand on an unprecedented treble. Within 11 days, it had all turned to sand. First, they lost the Bundesliga on the final day after bottling their 5-point lead, Borussia Dortmund pipping them to the title while Leverkusen could only watch in horror. 7 days later, they led 1-0 in the DFB Pokal final against Schalke through Berbatov's early goal, only to crumble 4-2 as their nerves completely shattered. Media and fans were brutal, coining the nickname Neverkusen and essentially accusing Ballack of having the sporting equivalent of stage fright. But the Champions League final loss was particularly cruel. They'd reached the biggest stage in club football after stunning victories over Liverpool and Manchester United, only to be undone by a moment of magic so perfect it belonged in an art gallery rather than a football stadium. Zidane's left-footed volley didn't just win Real Madrid the trophy, it certified 2002 as the most excruciating year in Leverkusen's history. What made it worse was this wasn't their first heartbreak. In 2000, they'd needed just a draw against Minno's Unterhaching to win the Bundesliga. But Ballack scored an own goal in a crushing 2-0 defeat that handed Bayern Munich the title. Some players are cursed, some entire clubs are. The psychological damage of the numerous failures was irreversible. Managing director Rainer Kallmund later said, "The players are still sitting in the cinema dreaming of last season. Unfortunately, they haven't realised the film is finished." Bayern Munich promptly signed Ballack, Lucio and Zé Roberto, while Berbatov eventually moved to Tottenham. The golden generation scattered like leaves in the wind. The club never returned to those heights until Xabi Alonso's incredible 2023-24 season, when they finally ended their curse by going unbeaten and winning their first ever Bundesliga title. The Neverkusen nickname could finally be retired. Leverkusen finally cracked the code. Don't lose the games that matter. Who knew it was that simple?
Fiorentina, 1998-1999. The Carnival Catastrophe. Gabriele Batistuta and Rui Costa had turned Fiorentina into Serie A's most romantic project. A team that played with the passion of poets and the precision of Swiss watches. Then Edmundo arrived and turned their season into a circus that would make reality TV producers weep with envy. The season started like a fairy tale. They topped the table by February, with Batistuta banging in goals like he was personally offended by every goalkeeper in Italy. The Argentine had become such an icon that Fiorentina fans erected a life-size bronze statue of him in 1996, while he was still playing for them. Then fate delivered the cruelest blow. Batistuta suffered a serious knee injury against AC Milan that would sideline him for over a month. Enter Edmundo, O Animal, who had a contract clause that would make modern footballers jealous: the right to return to Brazil for Carnival. As his strike partner lay injured and his team desperately needed him most, Edmundo literally flew home mid-season to party at Rio Carnival, leaving his teammates furious and the title dream in tatters. He was 2 days late returning, according to Il Corriere della Sera, because apparently samba rhythms don't respect European football schedules. But here's the kicker. This was the same Edmundo who, just 4 years earlier, had been involved in a fatal car crash during Rio Carnival that killed 3 people while he was driving drunk. Yet somehow, he still prioritized partying over his team's historic title chase. The man had literally faced prison time for carnival-related disasters and still couldn't resist the call of Rio. Rui Costa clashed with teammates over leadership, while owner Cecchi Gori meddled constantly, turning what should have been their greatest season into an Italian soap opera. The dressing room became a war zone where everyone had opinions but nobody had solutions. The aftermath was brutal. Batistuta, heartbroken by how close they'd come, was sold to Roma for €36 million, where he immediately won the Scudetto, probably laughing all the way to the trophy ceremony. Meanwhile, Fiorentina spiraled into financial crisis under Cecchi Gori's mismanagement, went bankrupt in 2002, and were relegated all the way down to Serie C2. The football gods have a twisted sense of humour. Sometimes when you let one player fly to Rio for a party, the whole house of cards collapses faster than you can say carnival.
Corinthians 1982–84. Democracia Corinthiana. While Brazil was under military dictatorship, Corinthians created football's most beautiful rebellion. Led by Socrates, a qualified doctor who chain-smoked, drank heavily, and happened to be a footballing genius, and the fiery Casagrande, the players voted on everything from training schedules to tactics to what they ate for lunch. This wasn't just locker room democracy for fun. It was a direct challenge to the military regime that had ruled Brazil since 1964, executed dissidents, and arrested thousands. The players knew they were risking everything. The military government called the club weekly, demanding they remove Democracia Corinthiana from their shirts and stop encouraging people to vote. They won state titles while openly clashing with both the club board and the dictatorship, proving that democracy could work even in the most unlikely places. Their 1983 championship celebration saw players unfurl a massive banner reading, "Win or lose, but always with democracy." A message that resonated across a nation starved of political freedom. The movement had real political teeth. When Brazil held its first multi-party elections in 18 years in 1982, Corinthians players wore shirts saying, "Dia 15, vote. Vote on the 15th. Many Brazilians were too terrified to vote, fearing arrest or worse, but the football heroes encouraged them. Record numbers turned out, and the military regime lost in all major districts, their first major defeat. Internal arguments were inevitable. Imagine trying to get 22 footballers to agree on anything, let alone dinner plans. But the democracy weirdly worked. They even voted on when to stop the team bus for toilet breaks. On weekends, they invited artists, musicians, and filmmakers for debates that lasted into the night. Socrates said if he had a good debate, he'd have a great game the next day. The players became anti-dictatorship icons, with Socrates speaking to crowds of 2 million people at democracy rallies. Their platform helped mobilize the masses for the Diretas Já, Direct Elections Now movement that ultimately forced the military from power. When Socrates left for Fiorentina in 1984 and democracy supporters lost the club presidential election to a military-backed candidate in 1985, the movement collapsed and the club reverted to normal management. But the legacy was immortal. They'd proven that footballers could be both athletes and activists. The football gods delivered poetic justice. Socrates died on December 4, 2011, the exact day Corinthians won the Brazilian championship.
He'd once said he wanted to die on a Sunday when Corinthians win a trophy. In the end, their rebellion helped bring democracy to Brazil while losing it at their own club. The most radical act had been simply believing that players were smart enough to think for themselves.
Russia, Euro 2008, the vodka miracle. Before Euro 2008, Russia was football's equivalent of that friend who talks a big game but never delivers. They'd missed the 2006 World Cup, crashed out of Euro 2004 in the group stage, and generally played like they'd rather be anywhere else, which, given their drinking culture, they probably did. Guus Hiddink arrived, imposed fitness standards that would make a Navy SEAL weep, and banned the vodka-fueled team bonding sessions that had turned Russian football into a meme. The transformation was immediate but brutal. Players reportedly resisted his fitness regime initially, with some threatening to quit rather than run another sprint. Andrei Arshavin was suspended for the first 2 group games and absolutely trashed by the Russian media, only to return against Sweden and remind everyone why he was worth the wait. Then came the quarter-final against the Netherlands, a 3-1 masterpiece in extra time that saw Arshavin score twice and assist another, humiliating the Dutch like some sort of chaotic genius who'd been saving his energy for the perfect moment. Roman Pavlyuchenko started banging in goals, 3 in the tournament. Yuri Zhirkov bombed forward from left-back like a man possessed, and for 3 magical weeks Russia looked like Brazil with a better work ethic. They reached their first semi-finals since the USSR era, playing football that was both disciplined and spectacular, methodical and magical. Behind the scenes, the Russian FA was feuding over bonus payments, while Hiddink worked miracles with a squad that had previously treated fitness tests as suggestions rather than requirements. Russia's high-intensity pressing game saw them outrun opponents who wilted in the Austrian heat. The Golden Run ended in the semi-finals with a 3-0 defeat to eventual champions Spain, and the aftermath was brutal. Pavlyuchenko moved to Tottenham for £13.7 million, but managed just 20 goals in 78 Premier League games, hardly the return Spurs expected from their Euro 2008 hero. Arshavin initially thrived at Arsenal with that famous 4-goal performance at Liverpool, but gradually faded as injuries and inconsistency took their toll. Zhirkov went to Chelsea and became a footnote. Euro 2008 remains Russia's golden outlier, a brief moment when vodka was replaced by work ethic and Russian football proved it could be beautiful. The football gods have a sense of timing. Sometimes magic happens when you ban the vodka, and sometimes it disappears when you realize the hangover was always going to come eventually. Football's greatest stories live in its beautiful chaos, where plans crumble, egos erupt, and madness makes legends. Subscribe for more of football's strangest, most unforgettable tales.